All right. So first and foremost, a little bit about us at ConnectGen. We are an independent power producer who is developing utility scale wind, solar, and energy storage projects really across the United States. Much like this project in the late stage of development in Shasta County, we have projects in Wyoming, Texas, New York, and a number of states in between that are in the late stages of development, looking forward to potentially starting construction in the next 1 to 2 years. And so what is the Fountain Wind Project? The Fountain Wind Project is a proposed 216 megawatt project that is in a area of timber production in the northeast part of Shasta County. Our project area, you can see on the map here, is outlined by the yellow hash. And that is immediately adjacent to the existing Hatchet Ridge project that was built a little over 10 years ago. We're about 1 mile to the west. We're about 7 miles west of Bernie, and we are adjacent to the communities of Round Mountain and Montgomery Creek that is on the west side of the project boundary. Now, I mentioned that 216 megawatts. That is the equivalent of enough electricity to power over 86,000 typical California homes. So kind of to put things in perspective, the amount of energy this project could put onto the grid. And what, really drew us to this area, one of the primary reasons besides the wind resource was that gray dashed line that's running through the project area from the upper right to the lower left. And that is an existing 230 kilovolt transmission line that runs between the pit #1 dam and the substation in Cottonwood. So our power would be going onto the grid at that blue dot that's kind of in the center of the map. That would be a new substation and switch yard. And this project would not require any new high voltage transmission line. Effectively, we are taking advantage of the unused space that's on that existing line. Now, the white dots are the turbine locations. We are proposing up to 72 turbine sites. But like I mentioned, at the end of the day, we are seeking to put 216 megawatts of electricity on the grid. Now, we are analyzing different turbine technologies. Those range from 3 megawatt each to over 6 megawatts each. The benefit from going with the 6 megawatt turbines is you would need far fewer of them. To get to 216 megawatts, you could get there with 36 6 megawatt turbines, 45, 5 megawatt turbines, or, around 70 to 72 3 megawatt turbines. So if you go with the higher generation turbines, they are a little bit bigger, up to 679 feet above ground, but you would need far fewer of them. And to put things in perspective, the larger turbines would be roughly 33% larger than the existing turbines on Hatchet Ridge. So why Shasta County? And I get asked this question quite a bit. And, I might have answered this question on the previous slide, but, these are the 3 key factors that drew us, to be interested in developing wind project in Shasta County. And they're also, really the 3 factors that any wind project needs to move forward with development. And #1 is compatible land use. Wind turbines can coexist quite well with existing timber operations, much like they can coexist with farming operations, growing corn and soy in northern Iowa, or ranching and high fence hunting operations in South Texas. I mentioned the robust wind resource. You know, a little known fact, the wind in this area, in the northeastern part of Shasta County, is better than a lot of the wind throughout the rest of California. And we know that because we have been studying and we have the data going back 10 years on the wind resource in this area. You know, the project currently has 11 temporary meteorological towers that are standing on the site, collecting wind data. And the first of those was installed all the way back in 2010. And third, and you know, equally as important, I mentioned, is the existing electrical infrastructure. If there was not a transmission line running through this project that had existing capacity on that line, well then we wouldn't be able to advance development and construction of the project. So those are really the three key factors that led us to this site in northeastern Shasta County. And so project benefits, and there are a wide range of the types of benefits that would come from the Fountain Wind project. First and foremost is the economic activity associated with the project. This project would be around a $300 million capital investment, and the direct benefits to Shasta County from the purchase of equipment and from the long-term, property tax revenue from the project are here on the screen. So over the 30 years of useful life of the project, we estimate that the project will generate over $50 million in property tax revenue directly to Shasta County. Now that's a big number, but to put that into perspective, if you break that down, that's about $1.6 million a year, and that would be the equivalent of funding 10 new full-time sheriff's officers for the county. That is fully funded, every year for 30 years. And the second number here is the sales tax revenue. And this would be generated from, the economic activity of purchasing materials for the project, purchasing equipment that would be delivered, to the county, i.e. our wind turbines. And that is estimated to be at $3.5 million over the course of construction. And the next benefits, of course, is job creation. This type of project would bring a lot of activity to eastern Shasta County. During construction, during peak construction, there would be over 200 construction workers on site. And once the project is built, there would be an operations and maintenance building within our project area, that yellow footprint that was up on the map earlier. And that office, that building would house our full-time staff. And we anticipate there would be up to 12 individuals who would be responsible for the long-term operations and maintenance of the project. And those are well-paying opportunities for people to live and remain close to the project area and continue to support those communities. And, aside from the direct tax benefits to the county and the job creation, beyond that, we are working to establish a community benefit fund. And early on in our engagement with folks in Shasta County, we started asking stakeholders, area residents, what kind of benefit would you like to see from the Fountain Wind project? And the ideas we heard were ranging from, increased public safety programs to youth educational opportunities. And we have taken those ideas and we have started to have a series of follow-up meetings with additional stakeholders in the county. And we are working to develop a program to take to the Board of Supervisors that would provide benefits along, those two categories and possibly some more. And so we are working to establish a program. It will be in excess of $1 million. And that program will be based on extensive community feedback. And another benefit, of course, is the energy independence. Having a large generation project right in Shasta County. Now, the project will, like I mentioned, will be interconnecting on the transmission line that feeds into the Cottonwood substation. From there, the electrons would go to the closest place where the power is needed the most. So what this does is it helps insulate the county from issues like PG&E blackouts that were experienced this past August. And I'd like to clarify that those blackouts are different than the PSPS, the public safety power shutoff events. But what happened this past August in the power shutoffs, the brownouts really, was directly attributable to not having enough generation on the grid at that time. So this project, which would generate during the summer and the winter, would be able to help insulate Shasta County from those types of issues in the future. And last, but certainly not least, is the enhanced fire safety benefits that would come from the project. You have the added fire breaks from the network of access roads that would be established for the project. We are anticipating upgrading somewhere around 30 miles of existing timber roads. And those would be upgraded to be 20-foot wide roads with at least 10 feet of cleared shoulders on either side. So that would be around 30 miles of 40-foot wide fire breaks spread throughout the property. In addition to upgrading the existing roads, there would be, up to 10 to 20 miles of new roads that would be constructed on the property as well. So along with the added fire breaks from the access roads would be the full-time presence on site. I mentioned the 12 employees in our operations and maintenance facility. They would have eyes and ears on the property and the surrounding properties and would be able to spot and react to any issues that would come up in a quick fashion. And the turbines themselves will be coming equipped with state-of-the-art fire suppression technology, and they will have these canisters in the very top of the tower that contain an inert gas, typically nitrogen, and there will be automatic sensors in the turbines. And if there is any sensor that is tripped, whether it be a smoke detector or a fault or something along those lines, the canisters would activate and flush out all of the oxygen in the turbines themselves and eliminating the fuel source for any potential fire. And at the same time, those turbines would automatically be shut down, disconnected from the grid, and they would not be producing any electricity whatsoever. And last but not least, the project will be developing a comprehensive fire prevention plan. This will be in close coordination with CAL FIRE and the county, Shasta County. And all of these efforts are above and beyond what the landowner, Shasta Cascade Timberlands, currently has going on the property. And they've got, some interesting stuff that, the public might not be aware of. And we've put that on our website, fountainwind.com, if you're interested in learning more. But, one of the interesting things that they've employed is a series of 10,000-gallon dip tanks spread throughout their land holdings. And this would allow for more rapid helicopter responses to any fires that would crop up not only on their property, but on neighboring properties. or even the Lassen National Forest to the south of the project area. And with that, we'll take a quick pause and see if there are any questions that have come in yet. And then after that, I'll hand it off to John to talk about the project status and where things are at.
Great. So to start, we have a lot of questions about the turbines themselves. So you were talking about various and different heights that they might be versus how much they might generate. Who makes that final decision, or how do we at ConnectGen make that final decision?
Yeah, very good question. So the turbines, there's a few different manufacturers. There's about 4 or 5 main manufacturers
And that was
that
another question we got, is do we make them?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So we do not make them, but we work with equipment suppliers. General Electric is one. Vestas is another. Siemens Gamesa, and then Nordex Acciona. Those are really the big 4 in North America, and frankly, in the world. And they all have manufacturing facilities spread throughout the United States. But we're in constant communication with them to gauge, what really is the best turbine for this site. And part of that is, what the price of those turbines are. And, looking at all of the wind data we have, gauging, based on the wind patterns, what is the most efficient turbine? So that is part of it. And that's an iterative process, and that's ongoing. So that's why I say we're looking at a range of turbines from all the way from 3 megawatts to 6 megawatts. Ultimately, we finalize our turbine decision about 6 months before the start of construction, which we'll talk about in the next few slides.
Got it. So going to the jobs and economics. So of the construction jobs and the permanent jobs, how many of those are local? Can we ensure that they are local? How does that process work?
Yeah, for sure. Well, for construction, we are working in tandem with the State Building Trades Council on an agreement, really a letter of commitment for labor for the project. And by doing so, working with the State Building Trades, we can guarantee that the workers in Shasta County that are part of the State Building Trades kind of have the first opportunity to work on the project. In our conversations with them and in our agreement, we will spell out like how the order of preference will work for people within X miles of the project. So really, we're looking to utilize the local workforce to the greatest extent possible and to the greatest extent that they are available.
Yeah, definitely. And then one more turbine question, and I think we can move on because I've got some great environmental and wildlife questions, but we're going to wait till after John does his section to answer some of those. But will there be more turbines coming to the county after this? Are there multiple more phases of the project, or is this it?
Yep. I've heard that question from a couple of folks before. And, the short answer is that this is the only phase of this project. It's one single phase, and we are not aware of any other developments in Shasta County.
Okay.
To get to the point where we are today with this project, John's, about to mention, it takes 3 to 4 years of studies and, filing an application with the county and going through a number of public steps. And we aren't aware of any other projects that have filed with the county. We do not have any plans to build another phase or to build elsewhere in Shasta County. This is really the only project that we're aware of, and frankly, it's the best spot in Shasta County for the project as well.
Definitely. And one more question before we move on. So does ConnectGen have any grid scale energy storage projects?
Yeah, good question. That might have come from somebody who's poked around our website. We do. And we have a project in southwestern New York State, which is a 270 megawatt solar and energy storage project. So it's storage paired with renewable resources. And we're also developing just standalone storage in California and in the northeastern United States, Massachusetts, New York.
Got it. I think let's jump into the project status because John is going to answer, I think, a lot of the questions we've gotten, and we will do some more Q&A at the end. So John, I hand it over to you.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Holly. Next slide. So Henry's talked a lot about the project and the project background, and a little bit about how we got to the identification of the Fountain Wind site. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what goes into the development process and end up on where we currently are in the development phase of the project. So as Henry mentioned, identifying a project site is really critical and really is the first step in developing a wind project. And ultimately, this site, as he mentioned, has good wind, has existing electric transmission, and compatible land use. And so, from there, we dial in and really perform a lot more detailed studies to understand the specific resources, specific sensitivities, and constraints associated with development on that site. And that information is used for many, many different things, including how we design the site, what the how the site is ultimately operated, and also is used in ultimately the permitting of the site. So some of the studies that have been going on the last 3 or so years focus on various natural resources, cultural resources, and resources associated with the human environment. So these kind of a selection of these include these listed here on the page, such as a site characterization study that goes into great detail in understanding what the land use is, what the natural communities look like on the site, any known resource sensitivities such as specific species of concern or aquatic resources of concern, etc. Then we go into even further detail on species-related considerations with site-specific studies for avian resources and bats. Avian species and bats are kind of known to interact with wind turbines. I mean, that's kind of no denying that. We've got lots of science over the last 30 plus years regarding bird and bat impacts associated with wind development. And it's really critical for us to perform these pre-construction studies to understand what's out there, what's the species diversity look like, the density and use of the site by these species, and are there certain areas that are higher use than others that we can avoid and hopefully avoid or minimize impacts once a project is built and constructed. We do rare plant surveys and natural vegetation community mapping in kind of conformance with CEDFW, California Department of Fish and Wildlife Service regulations and considerations. Sensitive species. So these are typically species that are listed under the Federal Endangered Species Act or California Endangered Species Act to try to identify, are there habitats present on the project site that support these species? And then if so, we'll perform presence absence surveys to determine if they are actually present in using that habitat. Hydrology and aquatic resource studies. These are field delineations of the boundaries of wetlands, streams, lakes, etc. Cultural resource surveys, again, pedestrian surveys of the site to look for prehistoric and historic cultural resources, as well as archaeological resources in the vicinity. Aesthetic and visual impact studies. These include performing visibility viewshed analysis to see if a project was built in this location, where would it be visible from? And then what would it look like? So detailed visual simulations have been developed. Sound studies to determine whether or not there's sensitive receptors in the vicinity and whether or not the project will meet the county sound standards. And then transportation studies. We have to get pretty large equipment to the site. Most importantly, turbine parts, components, and blades, which usually are associated with long haul, oversized and overweight trucks. And so it's important to understand the kind of the traffic that's associated with the roads to get to the site, as well as the best way to ingress and egress the site during construction and long-term during operations and maintenance. So this is kind of a selection of studies that have been done to date, and there's obviously more, and there's more detailed studies available online associated with some of the county documentation. But this information, a lot of it was used to help us inform the project design, and then ultimately the project that is analyzed in the county CEQA process, which we'll talk about here next slide. So as it informs our siting design, a couple of areas of interest that I'd like to talk about here, and Henry mentioned one earlier, and that's roads. This project area is under active timber production, and in order to effectively operate the timber production, the timber company has a pretty extensive network of roads on the site. And so we were able to site many of our access roads along those existing roads. A little under 2/3 of the roads that we're going to build on this project are using existing roads that are already on the site. And this is really helpful from an ecological perspective in minimizing potential for habitat fragmentation and minimize the new impacts that would occur to this area. Additionally, we're doing our best to avoid and minimize impacts to water quality, and that's through multiple ways. One, I mentioned with the road network, usually the ground disturbance associated with construction of this project is associated with with roads grading and turbine pad grading. And so by using these existing access roads, we're minimizing the new grading associated with the site, the new potential for erosion or runoff, and then also not creating new crossings of water body features such as perennial and intermittent streams. And we are, what will also occur is where there are existing, culverts or low water crossings that are, not in, good shape. We'll be replacing those with, new crossings that will be, essentially permanent and, will not restrict water flow and will allow, continued water transportation down those stream sheds. Wildlife considerations. So many of those studies I mentioned earlier are biological in nature, and they help identify the habitats, whether occupied or not, whether suitable or not. And then those help us determine where to avoid placement of turbines or placement of access roads, collection lines to avoid or minimize impacts. The sound studies that have been performed to date help confirm that the project site with the operation of the turbines and the construction activity will be within the sound standards identified by Shasta County. And then lastly, there's always a lot of interest in the long-term effect of this project on the environment. And in this specific case, this project will have a decommissioning plan that ensures at the end of its useful life, the project will be removed, and the project area that has been impacted will be reclaimed to its pre-construction condition. And this will be a requirement of the county. And so as a condition of the county's approval, that commitment will be in place, along with appropriate bonding and funding to ensure finances there to complete decommissioning at the end of the project's useful life. So where are we now? Many of these studies have obviously helped inform design, but also have helped inform the county's compliance with the California Environmental Quality Act. So this project is seeking a special use or conditional use permit from Shasta County. The planning department, therefore, has to perform an environmental study under CEQA. So in this case, they are performing a kind of the greatest level of California environmental review, an environmental impact report. This process all got kicked off back when the project filed its applications with the county in 2016 and 2017. Initial studies were done in coordination with agencies to determine what the potential impacts could look like and what would need to be studied. And this then led to the county filing a notice of preparation in early 2019, which kicked off a public scoping period in which folks were able to provide comments on the project as well as what they'd like to see studied in the environmental impact report. Ultimately, the county published a draft environmental impact report in August of 2020, That kicked off a public review and stakeholder comment period that ended in, I believe, around mid or late October. And now the county is currently in preparation of responding to comments in preparation of the final environmental impact report. Ultimately, that final EIR would need to be certified by the county, and that EIR would be used to show compliance with CEQA before the county made any decision on whether or not to issue Fountain Wind Project a conditional use permit. It's important to acknowledge what what the public gets out of the environmental impact report. The EIR is meant to disclose information on the potential effects of the project to the natural, cultural, and human environments. And it goes into detailed study on what the potential impacts are to an array of resources from biological, aquatic, cultural, to things like public health and safety, and noise and visual, etc. In studying these resources, the EIR identifies whether or not the impacts could be significant, and then if so, what are certain mitigation measures that could be implemented to avoid or minimize those impacts and reduce them to a level of less than significant. Over to you, Henry, to talk a little bit more about next steps.
All right. Thanks, John. And we only have one or two more slides here, and then we'll open up the floor to some more questions. But yeah, John talked about kind of everything that led up to where we are now. And so I'll talk about, where are we going and what are our plans for the project. And so, John mentioned the final EIR in response to comments. If things go, at a pace that they usually do for these documents, we expect those to be circulated to the public maybe next late January or February timeframe. And once those are finalized and issued to the public, the county will schedule public hearings, usually around 1 to 2 months after the documents are made available. So we expect sometime in early 2021, the early spring timeframe for those hearings to begin. And it will start with a planning commission hearing first. And then we anticipate, within a month or two of the planning commission, there would be a similar hearing in front of the Shasta County Board of Supervisors. And mentioned here, we think that'll still be sometime in mid to late spring of next year. And that is, an important milestone for the project in obtaining a favorable decision from the Board of Supervisors would immediately trigger, a ramping up of activities related to the project. And, if we were to get approval next spring, we would really look to get the project ready for construction shortly thereafter. And, the first step there is to, spend, about 3 to 6 months finalizing the engineering design. And like I mentioned, this would be based around our final turbine selection. So we have a good engineering design right now, but we would want to, get that to an issued for construction level of detail. And we would take that finalized engineering design and, towards the tail end of next year, next fall and winter, we would, do a competitive bid process for the general contractor who will eventually construct the project. And the question, how many of those jobs will be local, to that effect, earlier this summer in July, we had a local vendor fair with the different construction firms and services firms in Shasta County. So we've been building out a database of who or what organizations are in the county and would have the capability to work on the project. And we are going to keep them in the loop when it comes to, our competitive bid process with the general contractors. But, our goal would be to sign a contract sometime late 2021 which would allow for us to roll out with construction-related activities in the springtime of 2022, March, April, when the snow melts and the ground dries out a little bit. And so we are anticipating a 2-year project construction, and that is a nice relaxed schedule. The 2022, we would be focused on the access roads and the foundation work and the earth moving type of activities. And then 2023, we would anticipate the turbines to start showing up and to begin commissioning. And at the end of the day, we would anticipate the project to be fully online and operational by the end of 2023. And so before we wrap up, just a few more notes. I'd like to point out that we have additional resources available to those of you who are participating, and to anybody at our website, fountainwind.com. You can see here we've got a short and brief video kind of outlining some of the details that I talked about today. We also have additional fire safety information, a very extensive list of frequently asked questions. We have some of the visual simulations that are also represented in the county's draft EIR. And we have a Get Involved tab for local businesses and for individuals who simply want to reach out to us directly and, maybe have a one-on-one conversation to learn more. And, to that effect, we have the email for questions listed here, or a phone number for folks to reach out to us directly. And so, with that, I will conclude by saying that, these projects and, the Fountain Wind project represents a rather unique and rare opportunity to bring a tremendous amount of development and benefit to Shasta County. And, I encourage those of you who think that this project is a good idea and agree that you would like to see these benefits come to the county. I encourage you to spend, a minute or two to go to our website and click that blue support button and sign up and say, I support this project. I think it's a good idea. At the end of the day, your elected officials, they like to hear from you. They look to community leaders, their constituents, when they make a decision on a project. And, we would encourage those of you to participate in this process either way, for or against. That's our civic duties. So if you support the project, please feel free to go to our website and just, a couple of clicks and you'll be on our list, to demonstrate that you think the project's a good idea. And with that, I guess we will open the floor to a couple of more questions and answers. I know we've got, 17, 20 minutes left. We'll go, as long as, we're getting questions.
So going from what you were just talking about, Henry, we talked about how this kind of comes to fruition, but does the public get to vote on it? How does the public get involved with the project? Do they get to vote? Is it just the supervisors?
Yeah, so the public is involved by providing their opinions to the Planning Commission and the Board of Supervisors. Ultimately, it's up to those two boards and those two bodies to vote on the project. So the public, while not voting directly themselves, they have the opportunity to make their opinions known and make their voices heard in front of those, both the Planning Commission and the supervisors.
Definitely. So wildlife. So John, this might be for you or Henry. You guys can decide who wants to answer this. So wildlife has come up a couple times in the questions today and over our last couple ones. So birds and bats especially. So are there protections in place to keep them safe? I know we do the studies, but birds and bats come up a ton and when it comes to this. Yeah,
absolutely. Great question. So short answer is yes, and I'll expand on that further. So the reason we do the studies is to figure out what's going on at the site, what's the use look like, and that gives us a baseline understanding of the potential risk of interactions of the wind project, whether it be the construction or the operation, the risk of interaction with wildlife. And there's several reasons we do this. One, it is frankly an important duty of us, and we tout ourselves as being a company devoted to developing clean energy, and we also want to be generally wildlife friendly when doing that. And so we do that for the sake of protection of birds and bats, which are an important natural resource here. Secondly, we also do it because it's the law. There's certain species, certain natural resources out there that are protected by federal or state law. In the case of this project, there's the Migratory Bird Treaty Act that protects from the take of bird species, and there's the Endangered Species Act that protects from harm and harassment to threatened or endangered listed species. Same thing at the state level. There's a California Endangered Species Act and migratory bird protections that that protect those resources as well. So we do it also from a legal compliance perspective. So how do we do that? In a couple ways. There are one, we look to agencies to help inform our decisions on risk and inform our decisions on best practices to help avoid, minimize, or mitigate impacts. And so this project has been coordinating with folks at U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and California Department of Fish and Wildlife, as well as environmental NGOs to get their perspective as well. And through that coordination, as well as through following the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service's wind energy guidelines, which provide a framework for how we study, how we implement protections, and then how we react to impacts if they were to occur. We were able to provide a process to ensure that if there are impacts that do occur, what can be done to address those long term. And through the CEQA process, the county has identified additional avoidance, minimization, mitigation measures strictly related to wildlife to further reduce impacts. So there to provide kind of specific detail, there are certain mitigation measures like seasonal restrictions. So certain activities like when we can clear trees or do clearing grading activities, avoid doing that during the nesting season. Do surveys for nests and have setbacks from nests to ensure there's not any type of disturbance activity occurring. And then, long term, once the project's operational, we'll do post-construction mortality studies, figure out what the impacts what the actual impacts are on the site. A lot of times, we just don't know until after the project is operating. And that gives us something to further react to, coordinate with the agencies on what the appropriate response would be.
Great, thank you for that answer. So speaking in that kind of same vein, you talked about cultural resources, and that brings us to one of our other questions is about the tribe. How has the local tribe been involved? Do we know how they feel about the project? If we could get into that a little bit, that would be great.
Sure. Yeah, so the ConnectGen's been in coordination with the tribe to understand their concerns and do what we can to address those concerns. The tribe, the Pitt River tribe specifically, has been in opposition to the project. They did file a resolution of opposition to the county, I guess over a year or so, maybe 2 years ago now. And so that I don't want to speak for the tribe, but that's their stance. But regardless of that stance, we are doing our best to develop a wind project here, and as part of that development effort, we want to ensure that there's open and transparent communication with the tribe, so they understand what this project looks like, how it would be constructed and operated, and better understand the resources and the concerns that they have, and to see what we can do in terms of avoidance, minimization of potential impacts. So that coordination is ongoing, and will continue to continue through the future of the project.
Absolutely. So we have some economic questions. So economically, who's paying for the project? Is it subsidized? How is the government involved? How are taxpayers involved? How are who is funding this at the base of it?
Yeah. So good question, and I can take that. So ConnectGen, we get our funding from a private equity firm called Quantum Energy Partners. They are based here out of Houston, Texas, and they have been around since the mid '90s. And over the course of the last, 20 over 20 years, they have managed around $16 billion in equity. And traditionally, they have been focused on investing in upstream oil and gas companies. And when ConnectGen was formed over 2 years ago, they decided to make the foray into developing a, developer, owner, operator of renewable energy projects. So that's where our funding comes from. And with respect to subsidies, the wind industry, and us included, we do not receive any direct payments from the federal government or from taxpayers. There is a production tax credit. Again, that's a tax credit that the wind industry benefits from. That was established in 2016 by Senator Grassley of Iowa. Of course, that is a big wind state. And that is actually sunsetting over the course of the next few years. And once that tax credit goes away in 2024, the wind industry will be the only form of electrical generation that doesn't have any kind of preferential tax treatment. And, frankly, it's not needed for the wind industry to continue to grow and prosper. The price of new electricity, if you were to build a project today, wind is the second cheapest source of new electricity, cheaper than natural gas, much cheaper than coal or nuclear. The only technology that beats wind is solar, but solar is only producing energy during the daytime, whereas wind can produce energy around the clock. So there are benefits to building a wind project over a solar project because you get more consistent energy production.
And so for taxpayers worrying about if they're going to have to somehow pay for this project.
Yeah, correct. The answer to that is no. No, we do not receive any funding or any direct payments from the taxpayer.
Perfect. One last question, and it's a follow-up to one of our earlier questions on the grid scale energy storage. Is the storage in batteries or other tools, and any insight on what might be coming for storage capacity for the project?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So when we are developing our battery storage projects, and the ones that are more near term, the ones coming to fruition in the next few years, that technology is lithium ion batteries. That's kind of the prevailing technology today. Now, there are other chemistries that are under development, and there are other, there's some interesting battery storage ideas that are in proof of concept stage right now. One that I saw recently was literally a tall crane that picks up blocks of cement and stacks it on the a circular structure when the price of electricity is low and when there's a oversupply. And then when it needs the electricity, that same crane picks up the block of cement and it slowly, goes back to the ground, turning some gears, generating electricity. So, I mean, it seems pretty simple, but I mean, that's what energy storage is.
Yeah.
One of the buzzwords in the industry right now is hydrogen. Using excess electricity during off-peak hours to create hydrogen and then store that. The oil and gas industry is looking at this in particular in salt caverns or in their natural gas deposits, former natural gas deposits, but store that and then slowly release the hydrogen, which spins a turbine, creates electricity whenever you would need it. So different forms of battery storage, but the ones we're more focused on right now is the prevailing tried and true technologies of like lithium ion.
Yeah.
Which if you break that down to its smallest component, it looks like an oversized, AA battery, just, banks of them, set up in what looks like a shipping container.
Perfect. So I think that's it for our questions for today. Any others that I didn't ask that you want to cover before we wrap up for the day? Henry or John?
I don't have anything else, John.
Yeah, this is John. I was going to say there was one question that I don't think I touched on, and that was regarding bird safe turbines. And I wanted to kind of mention that any form of infrastructure that is in the built environment becomes a potential offers a potential for collision risk with birds. And so right now no turbine is kind of bird safe, so to speak. Now I want to caveat that with there's a lot of studies going on new technology to help operate turbines a smarter way to avoid potential times where there could be collision through informed curtailment, smart curtailment. And that is, we're learning more and more about that every day. And, we're, as a company, invested in some studies that are looking into that. So we do hope that as, technology continues to advance, then we'll have more options at our fingertips who further reduce potential impacts to wildlife.
Definitely. So thank you guys so much for joining us today. If you do have any questions, again, that email on the bottom of the slide or that phone number, we're here to answer your questions, talk with you. So reach out if you need to. We have another webinar tomorrow at 3 p.m., I believe, Pacific, and then another one next week as well. So if you have friends that have questions or if you want to watch it again, we'll be here. So thank you guys so much for joining us today and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Yeah, everyone take care.
Thanks all.